for quite a while. I don't know how long ago that we scheduled this. I know that ordinarily it'd be 4 or 5 years before I can go somewhere, because I have a job at home, believe it or not, and they don't want me to be gone all the time. But it's a blessing to be here. You all are special people. I've been treated well. The elders here seemingly have set a goal they didn't tell me about, and that is that when I leave here, I'll be the biggest preacher in the brotherhood. They have fed me every meal, and it's been good. I've enjoyed it. It's been a blessing. In Cookeville, Tennessee, a number of years ago, there was a Ford dealership. They called it Heritage Ford. I don't know if you've spent much time on car lots. When I was growing up, my dad thought you had to trade car every 2 years. So I've been on car lots a little bit. And I've kind of watched how those things work. I mean, you can barely step out of the car until somebody is right there. Sometimes it's 3 or 4 somebodies. Could we help you? What are you here for? What are you looking for? That kind of a thing. This particular day in Cookeville, Tennessee, at the Ford dealership, this fellow pulled up and stepped out of an old pickup truck. He was wearing a pair of coveralls, or overalls, depends on what you call them. He had boots that were, caked a little bit in mud. I mean, he was a working man. You could tell he was. There were a whole bunch of salesmen inside the building. None of them particularly had any interest in this fella. They figured he was just there to just, not kick the tires, and then he'd go home. This one new, young man, this early on in his career as a salesman, rushed out and introduced himself. He said, "What would you like to look at?" And the fellow told him he was looking for another pickup truck. They started to work their way, around through the various trucks, and he found one that he was interested in. The next thing he knew, this young salesman rushed in to the owner's office, and he said, I've never done this before. He said, can we take cash? You see, inside the bib of those overalls was a wad of $100 bills that big. What happened? Everybody looked at the outside. He didn't look like he had a nickel, much less enough to pay cash for a brand new pickup truck. You ever make a mistake like that? I have. I've looked at somebody and pre-decided, the type of individual they'll be. Now, it goes both ways. Sometimes, I look at the fellow and think, man, this fella's, he's with it. He's successful. He knows what he's doing. Come to find out, he's just wandering from job to job. He doesn't know anything about what he's doing at all. And I'll see some other fellow, he doesn't look like he could find his way out of the building. And he is highly successful. It's even that way in the Bible. Have you ever thought about it? The fellow that looked like a king was Saul. But he's far exceeded by a fellow that didn't look like a king. That was David. We've got to learn to look differently at people. In some ways, we've got to learn to stop prejudging them, and instead of that, look for the area where we have the best opportunity to reach them. I want us, for that reason, to begin now, if possible, to follow Jesus by seeing people through Jesus' eyes. As we think about how Jesus saw people, I think about some men that he saw as fishers of men. Now, not everybody viewed them the way that Jesus did. We need to understand that right from the outset. Now, even in Acts chapter 4, you've already had this tremendous day on the day of Pentecost. You've already had a really a pretty good showing at the temple as well, because of what happened at the temple gate, beautiful, and then the sermon that followed. But in Acts 4, here are Peter and John. They're standing before the council. And I want you to be reminded, as I needed to be, Acts chapter 4, verse 13, what they observed. Now, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, they perceived that they were uneducated and untrained men, and they marveled. One of the most powerful prayer leaders I believe that I've ever met was a fellow that did not even know how to write his own name. Oh, don't make the mistake of thinking he didn't know what he was doing. He worked in a lumber yard. He could tell you, if you give him the dimensions of your roof, he could tell you exactly how many bundles of shingles you were going to need. Never missed. Not one time. But he was uneducated. He knew it. It embarrassed him. He was afraid to step up and pray, but finally the brethren persuaded him to. And when he stepped up and prayed, you heard a man who obviously had been talking to God for a long time. He may not have looked like it, but he was that way. These fellas, they were a lot like him, as far as I can tell. Hard-working men, no doubt about it. Fishing for a living is hard. With those nets that have to be, drug in over and over again, thrown out, drug in, thrown out, drug in. Then you have to go in, clean the fish, sell the fish, clean the nets, mend the nets. It was a steady, full-time, constant job. But they're not the kind of fellows that you really would expect to be in leadership positions in anything except a fishing expedition. That's it. But what does Jesus see? Go back to the book of Mark. Mark chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. And listen to what we hear there. And as he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Then Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men." You know why I don't fish? I'm not saying I've never fished, but you know why I don't do it on a regular basis? Because if they don't bite within a half hour, I'm going home. It's the truth. I just want to look at myself and realize it. I don't have enough patience to fish. Do you suppose that patience that Jesus saw in their occupation and within them, do you suppose that could have had any impact on their ability to communicate with people the gospel of Jesus Christ? I think it did. I think their simple, hard-working men mentality and their patience in large measure was why they could be so successful, and Jesus saw it. We have people right here in this congregation who could easily be fishers of men. They've got the patience, the determination, that hard-working man, woman spirit. We need to tap into them. We need to see people through Jesus' eyes. If we do, we won't just see fishers of men. We may see a man without deceit. The story about this man is found in John chapter 1. It begins at verse 43. And as we look at this story, it's one of those where you just almost shake your head as you look at it. The following day, Jesus wanted to go to Galilee, and he found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Now listen to Nathanael's answer. And Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." You ever run into a plain-spoken fella? I had a real interesting experience. My dad was a gospel preacher. I get a kick out of that because people say, "Where are you from?" I said, "Well, my dad was a preacher. Where do you want me to be from?" I've lived most of those places, But I spent most of my years that I remember best in the West. Albuquerque, El Paso, Mesa, all that's out west. Prior to that, 7 years in Illinois. When you put all that together, let me tell you what you get out of that. You get one of those guys that just tells you the straight of it. No hiding it, no beating around the bush. It was a shock to move to Henderson, Tennessee. Southern people are so diplomatic that they go all the way around the bush, and then you're supposed to figure out what the bush is. It'd like to have killed me. Why don't you folks just tell me what you're trying to say? That was the way I felt. Nathanael, if he were in this modern era, now we'll listen a little bit further, but think about him just a minute. If we were hearing about him on the evening news, how would they describe him? Bigot, prejudiced, maybe a racist. That's the way they describe him. He hears where Jesus is from, and he already has a conclusion, willing to consider a different end of it, but his conclusion is, can anything good come out of Nazareth? What did Jesus see? Keep reading. Verse 47 of John 1. Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no deceit." Well, that's a nice way of putting it, isn't it? He's not going to fool you with what he has to say. He's just going to tell you the straight of it. That's what Jesus said, because that's what he saw. Do we need that kind of people? You go to the doctor, that's what you want, isn't it? I mean, do you really want him to maneuver around it, make you feel good when you don't need to feel good? When you need to have emergency surgery, and I mean you need to have it now? Do you want the doc to be kind and say, "Well, you got a little problem here, but it's okay. If you don't do anything about it, well, you'll be dead in 30 minutes. But no, tell me straight. Let's go. Let's go deal with this. This is a fellow you can use. He knows how to speak the truth. There's nothing here that suggests he was offensive with it. And if he were, I think the Lord would work on that. Paul writes about it, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15, speaking the truth in love. It's fine to speak the truth. Just make sure you let folks know you love them. This fellow here is a man that Jesus sees as having no deceit. Not a racist, not a bigot, not prejudiced. No, not at all. He sees a straightforward fellow, and we can use that in the kingdom of the Lord. Of course, Nathanael says to him, "How do you know me?" It's probably what we would have all asked as well. Jesus answered and said to him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." Nathanael answered and said to him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered and said to him, "Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You'll see greater things than these." Jesus instantly sees a fellow he can use. We've got some plain-spoken people in the Lord's church. Don't turn them aside saying, well, he won't do any good or she won't do any good. Too plain spoken. No, teach them to lovingly just tell it. It's okay. We need that. If I'm lost, I need to know I'm lost. Just tell me in a kind way so that I can study with you. Jesus saw in Nathanael a man in whom was no deceit. But on a different occasion, he saw one worthy of being his follower. And we began a little bit last night to look at the view of the Jews of the tax collectors. And maybe we need to think about that a little bit more deeply tonight before we really go into this next person that Jesus saw. Tax collectors were traitors. I mean, you think about it. The Jews were a people proud of their freedom. So proud, in fact, that they couldn't even admit they weren't free. That Rome ruled, in point of fact, and that they were under Roman rule. They did not like the Roman rule at all. And they surely didn't like Jewish people, Jewish men, who'd sold out to the Romans and were collecting taxes for them. They were the lowest of the low. They were, just don't touch them. Listen to what happened. Mark chapter 2, verse 16 gives us a glimpse of how they thought about him. And when it says, and when the scribes and Pharisees saw him eating with tax collectors and sinners, they said to his disciples, how is it that he eats and drinks with tax collectors and sinners? You know, you can almost hear them spit that out. Can't you? How could he eat with tax collectors? You know, you just about sense the way that they responded to that. That's their view. Now, how did Jesus see these people? Listen, go back just a little bit, verse 13. Then he went out again by the sea, and all the multitude came to him, and he taught them. As he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax office. And he said to him, follow me. So he arose and followed him. Now it happened as he was dining in Levi's house that many tax collectors and sinners also sat together with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many, and they followed him. I'm not real sure that I can illustrate exactly how this could happen in our society, but I'll give you an incident that happened to me some years ago in Poughkeepsie, New York. Went to help out a church that had developed preeminently by reaching out to drug addicts and alcoholics. A few streetwalkers and some who were pursuing the gay lifestyle. They had shown people that God's people just love souls. They had demonstrated it over and over again, and the church had grown because of that. We were out knocking doors, and two fellows who were new to the community, who were in a relationship with one another, passed by. I said, hey, we'd love to have you come tonight to the revival we're having. First guy just turned and walked on. The second guy said, are you sure that you'd like to have me? I said, absolutely. We love you. God loves you. Come visit with us. Learn the truth. Jesus is sitting down with people despised by everybody else. But what does he see? Listen, after the criticism of the scribes and the Pharisees, in verse 17 of Mark chapter 2, we find those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Did not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Some time ago, I met a young woman. I love to find out what young people are planning to do. Where are you going with your life? What you got in mind? And I'm always intrigued by the way they arrive there. I'm also fascinated by what some of them do to make sure they're on the right path before they ever really enter it. This one young woman thought she wanted to be a nurse, so she set up an opportunity to follow along while a professional was working. One day of watching the handling of the blood and the handling of human waste and dealing with people who had all kinds of sores everywhere. One day, and she knew that she was not going to be a nurse. Here's our problem, brethren. It's our job to be the nurse to spiritually sick people. It's our job. It's not always pretty. We're not always going to the people that everybody thinks would be, boy, they'd be great to have here, wouldn't they? No. The Lord sees someone worthy of being his follower when he looks at that kind of people. And then there's another fellow. And it's going to be very interesting to think about this fellow because Jesus sees this fellow as a potential apostle. Listen to the way he's described. Mark chapter 3, verse 18. I read out of the New King James. I'm going to have to go to the New American Standard to get a really clearer explanation of who this fellow is. But look just a moment. It's a list of the apostles, and it says there, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite. That's not the way he's described in the New American Standard. They say Simon the Zealot. Now, by the way, Acts chapter 1, verse 13, even in the New King James, describes him that way. He's a zealot. Do you know what a zealot was all about? The zealots in that era were a people who were determined to drive the Romans out, to drive them away. And they were of the opinion, in fact, it is said by some historians, that the zealots had sworn that if they saw a tax collector, they'd run him through with a knife. Now, Jesus has just picked, guess who? A tax collector to be a follower of his, actually ultimately also to be an apostle, and now he recruits a zealot. Boy, you talk about gasoline and fire. That's what it looks like you got. But the Lord made the difference in the lives of both of these men. And there are 4 specific listings of the apostles. Both of them are in every list. Neither one of them betrays the Lord, as you very well know. Neither one of them denies the Lord. Now, did they doubt? Yes. Did they leave him in his darkest hour? Yes, along with everybody else, they did. But these 2 fellows the Lord saw as men who could serve him, who would be great men to carry the message to all the world. The Lord saw a potentially great follower in a tax collector. He saw an apostle in a zealot. Now that zeal, by the way, is useful, don't you think? When you look at Titus, for example, chapter 2, verse 14, don't you notice that Paul says he gave himself for us for what purpose? That we might be zealous of good works. Man, a zealot's perfectly primed for that. You just change him in his zeal. You change him from his zeal for things that may be too strident, too carried away, to a zeal for the lost. Brethren, we need more zealots in the church. who have a zeal for lost souls, who cannot stand to see people lost without at least hearing about the Savior. You can't make them obey. I know that. The Lord knew that. But you sure can teach them, can't you? Jesus saw a potential apostle on another totally different occasion. He saw the heart of the kingdom. Turn, if you will, to Matthew chapter 19. Matthew chapter 19, verse 13. The people around Jesus, yes, even the apostles, thought that they knew what was best, and they tried to protect him from what wasn't best. On this occasion, we have a prime example of it. Look at verse 13 of Matthew 19. Then little children were brought to him that he might put his hands on them and pray, but the disciples rebuked them. Turn them away. Don't have time for them. Be careful. Are children important? Listen to the Lord. Listen to his view of it. But Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not forbid them, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." And he laid his hands on them and departed from there. I love children in an audience. Let me explain why. Because they have not developed enough social sense to know that they can't answer. By the way, I don't really think that socially that's the right thing in the church, but we tend to be stoic, in our worship. Don't say anything. Don't want anybody to be embarrassed. Children, every now and then I'll make a comment like, these people don't even believe in God. Do you think they're right? And some little child will say, no. Everybody in the building turns and looks at them. Look, they've got a pure, sincere heart. They are living demonstrations of what we ought to be. In terms of receptivity, now, they've got a gullibility about them. That's true. But they will accept just about anything that you deliver to them. And for some of us that are older, we need to have that same kind of a heart. We need to be challenged by them. Brethren, I don't know what you do here. Nobody's primed the pump. I don't know if I'm making a comment that's true to you or false to you. I'm just going to tell you what I've seen in several places. In a lot of places, noisy children are considered to be a problem. If you think that way, you need to rethink. They're the greatest opportunity we have. Teach them while they're young, while their hearts are tender. You can teach them to be quiet and at the same time encourage their questions. When they see the Lord's Supper begin to pass by and they say, "Oh, what is that cracker? I want some of that." It's a perfect opportunity to say, "Be quiet for now. When we get home, we'll talk about that." And then you can begin to talk about the Lord and what He did and how He cared for all of us and how His death on the cross means so much to us. They are a clean slate. We've got an opportunity to teach them. Jesus loved them for their heart. We need to see people through Jesus' eyes, even children. Jesus also saw a woman needing living water. Turn to John chapter 4, if you will. It's a bit ironic to me that Judy Rye would be here tonight, because I I have a whole sermon that I built that came from an event at Rose City. We had a fella come from the children's home. And he was delivering a message one Sunday night. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I knew he was talking about the children's home, and we supported it, and I still believe in supporting children's homes. Both of our children are in our household because they helped us get a child. I love children's homes. They do good things. But what I'm telling you is I'm really not sure what he was talking about at that very moment, but he turned to this passage and he made what was an offhanded comment. I didn't hear another thing he said because he struck a nerve, and I saw something I'd never seen before. He said, "Did you ever notice she left the water pot?" She left the water pot? Go to John chapter 4 with me and see a number of things within that passage. Beautiful, beautiful things within that passage. First of all, notice verse 4. But he needed to go through Samaria. Do you know there may not have been another Jew in the whole area who would honestly say they needed to go through Samaria? If they were in Judea and they wanted to go to Samaria, they crossed over the Jordan, they went up the Transjordan, and when they got past Samaria, they crossed back over the Jordan and into Galilee. But John, just almost offhandedly, it seems to me, obviously inspired, I understand that, says he needed to go through Samaria. And I've got to tell you, it's on my list to ask when I get to heaven. Why does he say he needed to go through Samaria? Was it specifically to impact these people through the communication he had with this one woman? What was it that changed this woman from a woman who came? Listen, she came at noon, midday, in the heat of the day to do what? To draw water. It's not exactly an easy task. When she gets her jar or whatever she had full, she's got to tote that thing back home in the heat of the day. You got to wonder if she's coming at noon because she's an outcast. I don't know. Scripture doesn't tell us. But Jesus has already arrived at Jacob's well. He's asked the disciples to go in and find something in the city for him to eat. And as he sits there and she approaches, he asks, "Would you give me a drink?" Listen to her answer, because it begins to explain to us something about what she expected in contrast to what she received. How is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Well, I'll say, ordinarily a Jewish man would not have even spoken to a Samaritan man. But go a step further. Historically speaking, we discover that Jewish men didn't talk to Jewish women in public. This is not just a Samaritan man, this is a Samaritan woman. And he speaks to her. Now, immediately notice something. It opened the conversation. My wife is slowly but surely teaching me. She puts me to shame on a regular basis. We go, as you might expect, to doctor's offices fairly regularly. A lot of the doctor's offices in the Jackson area have somebody to help folks like her get out of the car, get into a wheelchair, and so I can go park the car and come back and take her to see the doctor. You'd be amazed how many times that I walk up to get her, and she's talking to the person, and I'm hearing the end of a conversation, but it's going something like this. "We'd love to have you come visit us at Sywell Road. You'd fit right in." I'm thinking, why didn't I think of that? Why don't I talk to people? You know, you're not going to have a conversation if you're unwilling to say the first word. Jesus spoke to her, and the conversation is on. It doesn't stop there, though, does it? She's asked the question, he responds, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Now, she's intrigued immediately because he's going down a road she has no concept of at all. She's going to think in the early going only physically. That's going to be her focus. Watch her. The woman said to him, Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock? Jesus answered and said to her, Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. What's he doing with the conversation? He's making her want what he has. Sometimes we can't reach people because we don't make what we have seem desirable or needful. But Jesus makes her begin to think, I need this. Now, I know she's on the wrong page. I get it. She's still thinking physical water, but it's okay. He's got her going down the path, doesn't he? And the conversation, as you could imagine, will continue. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw. Well, I'll say, a woman that's coming at noon to draw water in the heat of the day is probably anxious to have a permanent supply of water without having to come to the well. He's got her. She is interested in what he has. But now watch him. He's going to force her to shift gears and get into the water he's talking about and think about it. How does he do that? Listen to what he does. Jesus said to her, Go call your husband to come here. That's an interesting one. Now, you and I wouldn't be able to do that ordinarily because we wouldn't have known what he knows. She says, I don't have a husband. And he says, well, boy, you answered that one right. Said, you've had 5 husbands, and the guy you're living with now, he's not your husband. You see how he's moving the conversation, though, over to spiritual matters. He's moving it over to her real need. Not for physical water, but for that spiritual, living water. Listen, the woman said to him, Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Now wait, her view's changed, hasn't it? She started off, he was a Jewish man. Now he was that. But now she says, I perceive you're a prophet. She's advanced. How did she do that? Because he's telling her about her needs, and he's telling her about her life, where she is. Now, I can't do exactly that, but I can lead people down a road to listen. So it goes further. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where one ought to worship. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Now he's got her exactly where he wants her, because listen to what her next desire is. The woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming. It's called the Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. Isn't that where he wanted her to go in the first place? To think about the Messiah? to think about salvation, to think about how you please God. And by patiently working and leading her along, he's gone from a Jew to a prophet. Now watch this next. This is one of the very few times in the entire earthly ministry of Jesus that you'll see this. Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. And it's then that she leaves the water pot. Why'd she leave it? I'll tell you what she tells the folks in town. She says, I've been talking to a man out at the well who knows everything I ever did in my whole life. Could this be the Messiah? She's gone from a Jew to a prophet to the Messiah. And he did it by gently leading her along because she needed living water. Now here's the question. How many people do you and I meet every day who need living water? It's just about everybody, isn't it? If we're going to follow Jesus, we've got to retune our eyes. We've got to start seeing people in a different way than we've been seeing them. Within the church, we need to see fishers of men. A few plain-spoken fellas, true enough. We also need to see those who previously were maybe in an occupation or a lifestyle that was not desirable, but they're changeable and they're willing to follow the Savior. And they've already demonstrated that. We may see those that have been zealous for the wrong things within the Lord's church, but we can channel that zeal into areas where it needs to go. We, in the Lord's church, need to see people with the hearts of children. Adults, true enough, but that have a pliable heart that's like Play-Doh. It can be molded if we'll take the time to show them the way. And above all else, we need to make it our focus to be a people constantly carrying living water. Because without it, souls will die of thirst in the devil's hell. You ready to make a change? I think for myself that what I have to do is to continually renew my commitment to think about Jesus, think about people like Jesus thought about people. And yes, sometimes I need to just say, hey, I've got my attitude messed up again. I need your prayers. I know I haven't been living like he wants me to live. I haven't been thinking like he wants me to think. I don't talk like he wants me to talk. Please pray for me that he'll forgive me and he'll help me do better. And you know, between James 5:16 and 1 John chapter 1, verse 9, I believe he'll give us what we sincerely ask for. If you're outside of Christ, I hope tonight you've seen that of all the people that have ever lived on this earth, he is the one that deserves to have you hear him. He's the one to whom you ought to turn. Don't worry about how he's going to treat you. He'll always treat you right. He knows how to set you free. All you've got to do is in penitent baptism, contact his blood and be set free. If you want to be seen as a great follower of Jesus, it begins one place. It begins with you yielding to him in the waters of baptism. Are you ready? Why don't you come while we sing? Have you a heart that's weary?
from the burden